Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Well, the federal Liberal government has a plan to cut greenhouse gas emissions from fertilizers by 30% in 2030. Canadian agriculture is a $23 billion business, and farmers are not taking this lightly. Here to discuss the impact of this fertilizer target is the CEO of Fertilizer Canada, Karen Proud. Welcome to Boom and Bust.
Thanks a lot, Tony. It's a pleasure for me to be here today.
It's a pleasure to have you. First, I guess the most obvious question is what exactly is the government of Canada proposing?
So, the government came out at the end of 2020 with a proposal to cut the fertilizer emissions from the use of fertilizer by 30% based on the 2020 levels by 2030. So, that was the original proposal. It was a voluntary approach. Um, Looking at how we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. From then, things sort of have evolved a bit, but that was the intent that came out in the climate action plan.
So, if this is voluntary, are there any consequences for noncompliance?
That's a really good question. So it's not a regulated approach. So, like some other industries where they have put regulated emissions caps on, this is a bit different from that. But of course, there are always consequences when you don't meet the expectations of government. And that was our concern at the beginning of all of this. It remains our concern that what does happen in 2030 if we haven't met this target. Is the agricultural sector going to be sort of named and shamed for that? Are regulations then going to come in? That's always, as I said, a concern when the government has put out a target, if that target is not going to be reached.
Yeah, because, not to put too fine a point on it, but, farmers sometimes are very interconnected with government programs. There might be different incentives or disincentives for the crops they're producing. So if you're kind of offside on your farm with a fertilizer target, is that one of the issues that there might be a kind of a carrot and stick approach here?
I think it's really the unknown that is the concern here. So we don't know what will happen in 2030. We don't know if the target is not met. What's then the next step? So I think that was the concern right when things were announced. There has been some clarifications made. Again, really a focus on the fact that this is voluntary. The government has acknowledged that this target is very ambitious. So that also comes to mind that it may be more of a North Star sort of target than a hard, we must hit. But still, it hasn't been, the detail hasn't been articulated to the point where people can really feel comfortable that come 2030, what happens at that stage.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'd love to unpack the various aspects of your reaction, Fertilizer Canada's reaction to this. Firstly, generally, how does your organization feel about it?
So we've gone through a few reactions since this was first announced. At the beginning, we were surprised. So, like all in the agricultural sector, as well as the provinces, we had not been consulted about the target. We were unsure where the target came from, and we didn't know the details of how the government expected us to meet that target. So that raised a lot of uncertainty, a lot of concern, and we started our conversation from that point. Fertilizer Canada moved on to start undertaking some work to look at the potential impact of this and what would it mean and what could be achieved. And we've since moved, I think, from that point to maybe a little more, how I phrase it is cautiously optimistic, because we have seen the government bring some more precision as to what they're really thinking. They're in a consultation period, which just sort of a formal period that just ended. There's more consultations to come. We've had better conversations with the department. I think we know a little bit more where things are going. So we've moved from kind of that shock and how did this come about to more that collaborative. I think there's areas that
Sure.
we can really work on.
We're going to take a brief break. We'll be back with our guest after that break. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with the CEO of Fertilizer Canada, Karen Proud, talking about the new proposals for reduction by 30% of fertilizer to affect our greenhouse gas emissions. I guess, Karen, I know it's a bit of a moving target. You're learning more as you go along. You're having more discussions with the government of Canada on this target. But can you give us a sense of how this does impact farmers?
Sure. So I think the bottom line and what we've really been trying to talk to the government about is we can't look at this emissions reduction in a vacuum. So it can't just be about emissions reduction. We have to look at how that affects yields and productivity of our agricultural sector. And that was our real concern and where we did a bit of a study last year to look at what exactly could be, in a worst case scenario, the impact on farm productivity if we took an approach similar to what Europe has done, where they're really requiring reductions in the use of fertilizer. Our government has now come out and said there is no intent to put a cap on fertilizer use, and they want to ensure that farmers can continue to increase their yields. And so that's very positive. But now we are stuck with a bit of a dichotomy between this target and the need to ensure that yields continue to increase and Canada can continue to contribute to maintaining the global food supply and food security. So we're at a stage now where it's really, we're trying to look at what can we achieve realistically between now and 2030 while maintaining and increasing farmer yields, because I think that's where the balance has to be struck, because Canada is such a huge player when it comes to agriculture exports, and food security globally.
Yeah, so help me and my audience walk us through this a little bit. If you can still use the same amount of fertilizer, uh, eh, you know, eh, eh, but they want a reduction of 30% in the emissions, is it a question of technology? Is there better fertilizer that way, or how does it work so that you don't affect crop yields?
That's a great question. And so you need fertilizer in order to grow the crops at the sorts of volumes that we need. The demand on farmers is just increasing as population growth increases. Farmers are going to have to grow even more. So there's a few things that I think will get us towards emissions reductions. So reducing the amount of emissions from fertilizer use, probably not to the 30% level, but towards that. One of them is just implementing best management practices on farm. So there's been a program out there for over a decade called the 4Rs, and it really looks at how fertilizer can be most efficiently used in order to both increase farmer yields, but also to reduce emissions. But also, as part of that, there are new fertilizers coming on the market. There's a lot of innovation in this space, and there's new fertilizers that help reduce the emissions from the use of nitrogen fertilizers. So I think both those things, the use of these best management practices to the highest level, as well as new technologies and new fertilizers, are going to get us at least partway to that target, and certainly to a point where I think it's still a very, very good news story. I think what a lot of folks don't understand is Canadian farmers are already using fertilizer in some of the most sustainable ways. We are better than most other countries in our nitrogen use efficiency. So that's something we should be proud of and we should celebrate. And look at how we can move a little farther, but not so far that we start to affect yields.
Yeah. So does it sound that you're fairly optimistic you can work with the sector to achieve at least part of the goal?
Absolutely, and we're conducting. We're just finalizing another study to look at exactly how far we think we can go. I think we can still make some significant progress on emissions reductions. As I said, I don't think we can get to the 30%, but if that's really kind of a north star and directional, then we're on the right track.
Right.
And I think there's still work to be done, but it has to involve engagement with the farmers.
Got it. Got it. We're going to take another brief break with our conversation with Karen Proud of Fertilizer Canada. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with the CEO of Fertilizer Canada, Karen Proud, talking about reducing the emissions associated with fertilizer here in Canada. Now, Karen, when this debate kind of erupted in the public sphere on this issue, it was also a time of uh, really a food security crisis in the world, especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So tell us a little bit about that context and where Canada fits in to help feed the world when normal sources of the things like wheat and sunflower seed and also production of fertilizer has been impacted by the Russian invasion.
Absolutely. I mean, Canada is a very dependable source of supply of not only food, but as you said, of fertilizer. And I think that has really shone a light on this issue and brought it out of the sort of traditional agricultural news into the mainstream where people are concerned about global food security. They're concerned about the role that Canada can play in helping that. And I think it really has sort of catapulted this issue into the mainstream. Most people don't give fertilizer a second thought. And I think it was someone recently who said to me, nobody thinks about fertilizer until there's not enough. And there's not enough right now. And we are heavily dependent globally on countries such as Russia, Belarus, and China for fertilizer supply. But Canada is also one of the biggest global suppliers of fertilizer. We export 90% of our potash. We're huge exporters of nitrogen products as well. And so this is really where I think Canada can step up and be proud of the fact that we've got such a strong agricultural sector, such a strong fertilizer manufacturing sector, and really show the rest of the world that they can depend on products from Canada. And I think that's where we need to balance our public policy with the need to really bolster these industries in this country.
Yeah, and is that part of your discussions with Agriculture Canada as well, that we do need to step up at a time of global insecurity when it comes to food?
Absolutely. I know the government has targets around agricultural exports, and the agricultural sector and the farm groups are working really hard on how we can achieve that. We're having discussions not only with agriculture, agri-food, but other departments about the fertilizer manufacturing sector, because again, fertilizer, in my opinion, is the most important product in the world. It's certainly the most important farm input in the world. And we need to make sure that if we're going to have a strong agricultural sector, we need to have a strong input sector as well. And I think there's a lot of room for that discussion, and people really are starting to pay attention to something you would normally never think about.
Obviously, around the same time, there's been some attention paid to farmers' protests in the Netherlands after. Well, you tell me, are there measures that they're protesting similar to what we're facing in Canada, or is there a fundamental difference? But clearly, there are a lot of farmers who continue to protest in the Netherlands about this.
Yeah, I think The end goals are similar. So it's all about emissions reduction. And we don't for a second disagree with that as a policy intent. We need to reduce emissions. We need to address climate change. There's no question about it. In Europe, they've taken different approaches. They've taken more regulatory approaches. I know in the Netherlands, there's other factors that have caused these protests by farmers, and I think a lot of people have made parallels between the two. We do have a different approach here in Canada, as we've discussed. It's a voluntary target that we have put out. The government is working very closely now with groups. But it is interesting that it took a group of Dutch farmers to really bring this to the forefront
Mm.
and get the sort of attention on the issues that it was probably due, a year ago when this policy first came out. But I'm certainly glad, not for the horrible events that are happening in Ukraine or what's going on with the concerns of farmers, but I am glad we're having this dialogue now in Canada about this sector, how important it is, and then how do we drive investment into the sector as opposed to pulling it out.
Well, we're going to have one more segment to talk about these issues. We're going to take a brief break. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with the CEO of Fertilizer Canada, Karen Proud. Karen, maybe just take us through. You talked a little bit about your discussions with the Agriculture Canada on these targets for reduction of emissions, et cetera. Maybe walk us through where you see those going. Is there a need for more discussion, or what is really the next stage, and how are you working with the Canadian government on the next stages?
Well, I think this is really the start of discussions. So the target was announced end of 2020. We sort of scrambled around for a bit. There's been a lot of conversation. The government and Agri-Food Canada came out with a discussion paper not that long ago that got into a little more detail. We were pleased to see the direction it was going, the recognition of some of these existing programs like the 4Rs. The government has just ended a consultation where it was soliciting input from various sectors, including ourselves, into this target. I know that they're setting up some technical working groups now to really sort of dig even deeper into it. So they've certainly shown a desire to have that dialogue. Maybe in our minds, it came a bit late, but we're happy to have it. Now, what really needs to happen is to look at what is a practical, pragmatic approach to reducing emissions from the use of fertilizer. And let's work with farmers and farm groups on how we might achieve that. Fertilizer Canada has some views on that. We feel that we've got a really good existing program in the 4Rs. We just need to have more uptake across Canada to really get the benefits of that. We need now to work with the government on how to achieve that. How do we partner with them? How do we have those conversations? Because I think we all want the same thing. We all want to reduce emissions. It's just, let's find the practical way of doing so.
Are there different approaches currently being deployed or in the process of according to province, or is it fairly uniform across the country?
So there's different approaches that have been discussed. We are certainly promoting the 4Rs best management practices. They've been around for over a decade. Farmers are
And maybe
using
just tell us
them.
which are the four R's. So there must be four words starting with R. Maybe just tell our audience what that is.
Sure, it's about using the right source of fertilizer at the right rate, so the amount of fertilizer used at the right time, so the right time of year to use fertilizer in the right place. So
Got it.
whether it's at the root, and it's really about using fertilizer in a way where the plant can make the most out of the nutrients that the fertilizer is bringing to the plant while minimizing any emissions or other waste from fertilizer. It's a program that's been around for over a decade. We think it really needs to be that cornerstone of any approach to emissions reduction. And that's where we want to start the conversation with the government on how do we get more adoption across the country. We have some provinces very, very engaged. They've signed MOUs with us about wanting to bring the 4Rs more into their provinces, and I think we need to see that sort of national approach and support from the federal government on that.
We've got just under a minute left here. Are you, as part of it, educating the farmer as well? Is that part of the goal?
That's a huge part of the program. Farmers are great stewards of the land. I think what we need to do is help bring the knowledge and the research to the farmers so that they can make the decisions about how to best implement these practices specific to their farms, specific to the crops that they farm.
Yeah, because there's such a wide variety of crop as well, so it has to be specific to the crop.
Absolutely. A wide variety of crops, wide variety of climates, wide variety of soils. It cannot be a one size fits all approach.
Got it. Well, Karen Proud, thanks for joining us today. Very interesting, very informative for our audience, and I wish you well with your consultations.
Thanks so much for having me.
Interesting discussion there with the head of Fertilizer Canada, Karen Proud, about these upcoming regulations or targets, at least, to reduce emissions by fertilizer by 30% by 2030. A lot going into this. Obviously, it has a huge impact on our agricultural sector and therefore the food that we eat and consume, and a huge multi-billion-dollar industry. So thanks for sharing this time with us. I hope it was as informative to you as well.